Today, we're diving deep into how this phenomenon takes on an entirely new meaning for individuals navigating the complexities of reentering society after incarceration. Prepare to challenge everything you thought you knew about work ethic and career integration. Now, before you roll your eyes and think, oh, come on, Antoine, quiet quitting is just people being lazy at work. Hold up, just wait a second. I get it. That's the mainstream narrative. We've all seen the clickbait articles and TikTok videos about people doing the bare minimum at their jobs to stick it to the man. But here's the thing, there's a whole other side to the story that almost no one, I can guarantee you, no one is talking about. For a lot of people coming home after incarceration, like me, quiet quitting isn't a rebellion against corporate culture. It's basically a form of self preservation. And if you've never had to navigate a workplace while carrying the weight of a criminal record, then the anxiety of background checks or the constant fear of being judged for something you did years ago, well, it's hard to understand why giving your all isn't always the safest choice. Now, I've interviewed dozens of returning citizens on the conviction fiction. Some were desperate to prove themselves on the job, ready to work harder than anyone else in the building, until they realized that the game wasn't played on a level field. That eagerness slowly got replaced with guardedness. And that guardedness looked from the outside, it looks a lot like disengagement. So today we're going to break down why quiet quitting has an entirely different meaning for this community, why employers often get it wrong, and why it would what it would take to replace quiet quitting with something far better, and that's quiet thriving. Welcome to the Conviction Fiction. All right, let's start with the definition most people don't know, right? Most people listening to the show, you do it every day, but you probably don't even know what you're doing. And that is quiet quitting. As the internet tells it, is when an employee does just enough to meet expectations, but stops going above and beyond, right? They clock in, do their job, clock out, no unpaid overtime, no taking work calls on their day off, no bending over backwards to please the boss who really might not appreciate them anyway. It's a pushback against burnout culture. But here's where the narrative shifts when we talk about people re-entering society after incarceration. Quiet quitting in this context is rarely about being fed up with hustle culture. It's about really just figuring out how to survive in a new, unfamiliar, and sometimes hostile environment. Because when you've been locked up, your concept of work has been shaped by an entirely different system. Because work inside prison is about compliance. It's not about ambition. It's about you need to do this or you're going to get ridden up, or you need to do this to get away from, some of the craziness that might be going on in the dorms or in the pods, whatever, right? It's about doing what you're told so you don't get ridden up, like I said, transferred, or worse. You learn to avoid standing out too much because standing out in either direction can put a target on your back, right? You're working too hard, right? What are you working hard for like that, you know? Or you are working too less, so you don't need to be working in the kitchen because you're not putting out enough, right? So when someone comes home, that learned behavior doesn't just disappear. Even when the job is on the outside, the instinct is still there. Don't give them more than they need to see. Protect yourself. Don't get too comfortable. Now, I've had podcast guests tell me about jobs where they started out eager and full of energy, only to realize that within weeks that they were being treated differently from their coworkers. A harmless joke about their past. Maybe there was a boss who casually mentioned they'll be keeping an eye on them. right? The sudden assignment of all the grunt work no one else wants to do. Over time, that fire becomes dimmer and dimmer. So, to an outsider, to the outsiders that might be listening, it might look like disengagement, but for someone in reentry, that measured withdrawal can be an act of survival. And I say that because it's about setting boundaries in a place where giving too much of yourself could leave you vulnerable, not just emotionally, but sometimes physically, financially, and legally. So, quiet quitting in this case isn't laziness, it's a calculated decision to protect your stability. Now, this invisible barrier can be a trap, okay? It can be a work ethic trap because society loves to champion the idea that if you work hard, you'll succeed. How many times have we heard that? All you got to do is work hard, put your nose to the grind, you'll succeed. But when you've been through incarceration, that formula doesn't always work out the way motivational posters claim, right? Because in prison, hard work doesn't mean climbing the ladder. Where are you going to climb to? What are you going to climb to if you're working hard in a prison? It means following orders when you're in prison. It means keeping your head down when you're in prison. There's no bonus for exceeding expectations. Now, I've seen people like, they work hard or whatever. They get a hamburger, free world hamburger, something like that. But I mean, going above and beyond might only mean more scrutiny or more work without more pay. Now, that mindset doesn't just vanish when you get out. You combine that with the culture shock of re-entering a fast-paced, competitive job market, and you got a recipe for deep frustration. Now, the hustle culture can feel completely foreign, and worse, it can feel unsafe. Now, I'm not going to dig into it too much because it's really a rabbit hole because you can add the psychological weight of stigma. Every job application asks the same question over and over again. Have you ever been convicted of a crime? Every interview is a gamble. Will they hire me for my skills or will my record be the deciding factor? So I've heard heartbreaking stories from people who finally landed a job in their trade, whether it's welding, electrical work, HVAC, motivational speaking, training, only to be demoted to the most menial task because their background check came back. Not because of poor performance, but because company policy dictated it. So what happens next, right? They stop trying to be the standout worker. They stop raising their hand for extra projects. They protect themselves from the emotional whiplash of investing too much in a place that doesn't invest in them. Now, this isn't about rejecting work ethic. This episode is about recognizing that the traditional definition can be a trap, one that asks returning citizens to give more than they'll ever get back without acknowledging the real structural barriers in the way in the first place. Now, let's go beyond the buzzword for a second because when you strip away the corporate jargon, why quitting is really just a label. And labels have a funny way of making something sound neat and easy to dismiss, when in reality, what's happening under the surface is complicated, messy, and deeply human. Now, it brings to mind of a man I like to call Mike. He came home after 8 years inside, determined to make good on the second chance he was given. He landed a warehouse job, nothing glamorous, but there were steady hours, decent pay, and benefits. Like we all need those benefits. So on day one, he was the first in the building and the last to leave. He volunteered for the toughest shifts, handled the dirtiest jobs, stayed late to make sure his team hit their quotas. But here's the thing. No one in that building was seeing Mike for who he was. They saw his record. At first, it was small, someone joking about him being the muscle in the room. We get home, we been on the weight pile and we kind of bigger than everybody else. We're fit, right? We work out and we have this strict routine. We still, work out when we get home, and now we at this job, and all of the warehouse workers are, not saying not smashing warehouse workers. Like, you guys are the greatest. But you coming home from prison, going to a warehouse, and somebody that's on a square, then it's a little bit different, right? You got the middle-aged white dude with the beer gut driving the forklift, but then you got this guy over here that's strong. They got muscles. So the supervisor started using his past as a part of the workplace. So what felt funny to them felt like a knife twisting in Mike's back. When promotions came around, Mike was told he was a great worker, always on time, but that the company had to be careful about who they put in leadership. Now imagine that's you, right? Because it was me. Giving your all, play by the rules, work harder than everybody else, and it's still not enough to overcome your past. Would you keep going the extra mile, or would you start protecting yourself in your next job? Now, Mike made the choice a lot of returning citizens. He clocked in right on time, did his job, but stopped giving away the parts of himself that were getting bruised every day. So from the outside, it looked like he was disengaged, right? Now he mad because he didn't get promoted. He's been working hard every day. That's the thing that you've been telling us. Work hard every day and you're going to get rewarded. So it wasn't laziness. It was an emotional survival mechanism. Then there's Lisa. She was a guest on the podcast. Of course, I'm protecting the names, but she had built a steady career after release, but kept her head low. She turned down a supervisor role, not because she didn't want the responsibility, but because she was terrified that the customers or colleagues would dig into her past. For her, quiet quitting wasn't about doing less work. It was about limiting her visibility to stay safe. And on a personal, I did that with this podcast. I was involved with like baseball leagues. I was involved with, community events and stuff. And I just did not want to put it out there that I had been in prison. I think it shouldn't like determine or make people feel any kind of way about me because I have been to prison, right? Wrong. Because these aren't isolated cases. You've heard the versions of these stories over and over again. I've lived it. And when you see the pattern, you realize something. Quiet quitting and reentry isn't a rebellion, it's armor. It's saying, I can't afford to give you all of me because I might not survive the fallout if I do. I might not survive the fallout if I do. So, with that being said, how do we bridge the gap, right? What is society? What are employers missing when it comes to quiet quitting and the returning citizen? Now I can say that the disconnect between how employees interpret quiet quitting and what's actually happening for returning citizens is massive. Employers often see it as laziness or entitlement, and that's because they're looking at it through the lens of a system built for people without criminal record. That's a key thing. Without criminal record. Someone comes in, you dig up their past, you find out they really weren't doing nothing with their life. Okay, so be it. Right? It was maybe this is an opportunity for them. They went to school, they graduated, but they didn't do anything with their life. But when you have a criminal history, it's different. The rules are different from the jump because you got to go all the way back to the hiring process. Before a returning citizen even gets their first day on the job, they've already had to jump through 3,000 hoops. Got the background checks, got to dig up convictions from decades ago, often unrelated to the job that they're applying for. But in some companies, policies within human resources explicitly block people with certain records from ever advancing, no matter how stellar their performance is. So you walk in basically knowing there's a glass ceiling that you'll never break. And then there's the workplace culture. Now, I've heard people tell me their employers claim to be second chance friendly, for the public relations value. But in reality, they are treated like they're on permanent probation. It's just conversations that I had, not just on podcasts like the Convict Fiction or any other podcast I've been on, But one of my friends told me he couldn't even take lunch breaks off site because management didn't trust him. Now, all the other employees came and went as they pleased, but they didn't trust this guy. And that's not looking for inclusion. That's surveillance dressed up as opportunity. That's what it is. Here's the thing. When you operate under constant scrutiny, you can't bring your best self to work. I'm going to say that one more time. When you operate under constant scrutiny, you can't bring your best self to work. You're walking on eggshells. You're not thinking about innovation or maybe leadership. You're thinking about not giving anyone a reason to suspect you don't belong here. And now for a quick commercial break. If you are ready to transform your life today, no turning back. The Journey Home and the Work Within is more than just a book. It's a roadmap for redemption, resilience, and rebuilding. In this deeply personal and powerful narrative, I share my journey from incarceration to empowerment, and I kind of weave together stories of struggle, growth, and transformation with a little help from my friend. With raw honesty and a message of hope, this book is a must-read for anyone seeking to break free from the past, embrace second chances, and build a better future. So if you are ready to turn the page on your story, no turning back will inspire you to confront your challenges, embrace your potential, and take that first step toward change. Get your copy today and start your own journey toward healing and transformation. I'm going to go back to one of my favorite conversations on the podcast. This was with a man who had worked for a manufacturing shop. Now, the owner never once asked about his record. He looked at his skills, saw the quality of his work, and then hired him on the spot. That act of trust meant everything because he trusted his skills. The supervisor saw what he could do and said, hey, you're the man for the job. That man stayed loyal to that shop for years, worked overtime when needed, and even helped train new hires. Why did he do that? Because the environment was built on respect, not suspicion. Employers often underestimate how powerful trust can be, right? They think engagement comes from incentives or company perks, like you go to the company picnic. But for someone re-entering society, engagement starts with feeling like you're truly wanted there, not just tolerated. Until workplaces recognize that quiet quitting will keep happening, not because people don't care. Don't get me wrong. People do care. But it happens because they've learned that they have to protect themselves in environments that were never designed for them. Jobs don't think about like people getting out of prison. They just want somebody to do the work. But once they find out that you've been in prison or been incarcerated, but that you are, a returning citizen, then it becomes a problem. And then everything changes. So moving forward, guys, that's what this conversation is about. We know the problem. We talked about it in depth. There's good news, though. Why quitting in the reentry community isn't inevitable. It's basically a symptom of a system that can be fixed if we're willing to do the work. And the fixes aren't rocket science. For employers, let's start there. For employers, start with removing unnecessary barriers. If a conviction has nothing to do with the work being done, stop letting it dictate whether someone gets a promotion or access to certain roles. Create clear or transparent pathways for advancement. And then give the training that builds on the skills that someone already has instead of keeping them stuck in entry-level positions forever. Now, workplace culture is just as important, man. Replace surveillance with support. I know that sounds crazy. Just take out the cameras and all that hovering over you and just give support. That means treating all employees, returning citizens or not, by the same standards. It means making space for, mentorship programs where experienced staff, especially those with lived reentry experience can guide new hires through the adjustment process. Communities have a role here too. Now, mentorship, training programs, and transitional support can be the difference between someone who disengages to survive and someone who fully commits to thriving in their new role. I've seen firsthand, both on the conviction fiction and in real life, how a single mentor can change someone's trajectory. Sometimes the difference between quiet quitting and total disengagement, total engagement, is just one person saying, "Hey, I believe in you." Somebody saying, "I don't think you're the person for the job because of your history." And policymakers, we can't forget about the policymakers. They're out there. They're out there making the rules, laws. Like, I've never been one to say that we don't need policing. You'll never hear that on a podcast or whatever. But fair policing, fair judges, fair policymakers, all of that's important, right? Um, Second chance hiring incentives are great, but they need teeth. It's not enough to reward companies for hiring people with records. We should also be holding those companies accountable for creating environments that allow those employees to succeed long term. The ultimate goal here isn't just to give someone a job or feel bad for somebody, because that's what everybody, I ain't gonna say everybody, but a lot of people that listen to the podcast or have, I see the comments, they think that someone that got out of prison is like looking for excuses. That's why we highlight the success stories. That's the only reason why we're on here, to highlight the success story. So it isn't about giving somebody a job. It's about giving them a real shot at building a career, supporting their families, and contributing to their communities without being forced to navigate a minefield of mistrust and glass ceilings. Quiet quitting may be a workplace trend in the broader culture, but in the reentry community, it's often seen as a survival strategy born out of necessity. If you want to replace it with true engagement, we have to start by building workplaces and a society that makes people feel safe enough to bring their whole selves to the break. That's when we'll see not quiet quitting, but quiet thriving. To quiet quit or quiet thrive, what do? When we strip all the fluff away, here's the takeaway. Quiet quitting isn't always what it seems. For many returning citizens, it's not a trend, it's a survival strategy. It's the armor that you put on when the world keeps reminding you that you're not fully welcome. It's a way of protecting your mental health, your dignity, sometimes your job itself. But I believe we can flip that script, that we can turn quiet quitting into quiet thriving, where people don't just survive in the workplace, but actually flourish. That starts with rethinking how we define work ethic, removing those barriers that keep people locked out of opportunity, and creating environments where trust is a standard, not an exception. So if you're an employer, ask yourself, am I truly giving second chances or just hiring people with records to check a box? If you're a policymaker, ask, well, are we just rewarding companies for hiring fairly? We're just trying to give out tax breaks for public relations. And if you're part of the community, whether as a mentor, friend, or neighbor, ask yourself, how can I help someone move from quiet quitting to fully engaging? Because here's the truth. Someone coming home feels supported, respected, and valued. They will give back tenfold. I've seen it happen in my personal life and on this platform. I've heard it in the voices of guests who started with nothing and built something worth showing up for every day. So, if you made it this far in today's episode, I want to leave you with this. The next time you hear someone talking about quiet quitting, remember it might not be about a bad attitude. It might be about survival. And if we do our part, survival can turn into success. Thank you for tuning in to the Conviction Fiction, where we change the narrative around life after incarceration, one story at a time.